To prepare our assembly for the drawing, we'll go ahead and open up one of the previous. Oh, looks like we went to the 3D print folder. So let's go back to my drive and to my assignments, and we'll pick up one of the assemblies. And we can have as many assemblies, what if scenarios as we need, but really only one of these is going to have priority. So if I'm building into the as a subassembly, I want to keep one name, and then I can save as at a stopping point, or possibly do a zip file of the whole folder to take a snapshot at that point. So let's just grab 2 since I've revision 2, since I've modified revision 3 a couple of times, and we'll give it a chance to load. Okay, so since we have the crank, the pin, the coupler, the follower, this is my singles, not dealing with the second set with the configurations. So a little bit, mostly the same, but a little bit different that we'll see in the property manager of our configurations. All right, so let's get out of the cam, and we can add an exploded view, and we can have multiple exploded views within the configuration, and we can have multiple configurations with their exploded views, but really we want this to be static, so I should check that real quick. If I try to move something, it says components fully defined. The only thing that I'm seeing with minus signs are the pins, which are able to rotate. And again, if you want to get rid of the minus signs, we just come over to the concentric, at least one of the concentrics. And if it lets me lock rotation, that will cause it to stay in place. All right, so to go into the exploded view, let's see if we right-click on the configuration, which is the same as coming up here to the command manager. And we're going to do a new exploded view. And I always like to just illustrate that we can do one, and then multiples, and then groups. So if I do single, we're going to get the orbital, the triad, and that one item is going to expand. When it turns into the orbital, then I can rotate it, but not really any need. We want to make this clear, not maybe more complicated. So if I want to put in a value, 4 inches, that'll help with the spacing a little bit. And that first chain, that first step is done. Okay, and then if I do 2 items in the list for chain 2, also notice that we're just doing straight regular steps, translate or rotate, and then radial steps would be something like a circular pattern that we want to well, explode radially. All right, so those 2 items will come out together, and we can go, say, 3 inches on those, and it helps a little bit. Not necessary to put in those values, but it helps a little bit with the spacing and the visualization of what you're telling it. So we have chain 1, chain 2. Chain 1 is just the coupler, chain 2 is the group, and under the group we have pin short and 1 and 2 instances. All right, then we get into the auto space. And the auto space, we can look at some of the different directions, so to speak, of to the center, to the rear, to the front, and how it's going to generate that auto space. So pretty much we're done with that one. Since I clicked on it, it activated. And so I want to pick the 2. And this is kind of driven by the order of selection, so you have to pay attention a little bit. Not always, but they do pick those up. So with the auto space components, this is going to be the sliding scale of how much they stretch or shrink, as the case may be. So on the auto spacing, if I drag those, then I can set the spacing. Let's just go 1 inch. little bit closer, and then I can move those in or out to suit. Now I could have grabbed all of those parts and done the auto spacing, but for illustration and just the technique, that's your choice as to which ones you want to pull from. So if we expand out, I can double click and it will collapse, double click and explode. And probably one of the most common things I see in the drawing is people want to save this as a separate file, and it's not necessary. This exploded view lives inside of this assembly, and when we create our first drawing sheet, we can activate that explode. So if I want another explode, I can give it a new exploded view. And for, again, illustration, if I pick all of those parts, and I am going to try and pick them in an order that I think will best do the auto spacing. And as we drag that out, those all move together. And so let's go with like a 2.5, well, maybe not that much, 2-inch. And then as I drag the spacing bar, then we'll see them go in and out. If I go to the centers, it changes a little bit. If I go again, you're seeing it jump around a little bit more. And hopefully one of those is going to suit our purposes. All right, so I have an exploded view 1, exploded view 2. Double click on it, it collapses. Double click on view 1, it expands. We can go through those processes, and we want to make sure to save so that when I activate my make drawing from assembly, and if we're still using the standard template drawing, keep in mind this is a first angle projection. We're going to grab the A landscape. And for the assembly, you're not really going to notice it. If I grab the exploded, isometric exploded, and drag it into the view, then over on the left in the property manager, there is only the default configuration, right? So hit the expand that out, there's only going to be the one, but we have the two exploded views. So if I pick that one versus that one, then I have the two items. And again, I can tell this is first angle projection because my isometric is in the bottom left rather than in the upper right. So if I go ahead and save, accept that, then I can do a Control C as long as this is highlighted in my first selection and paste it. Then if it is a different configuration or anything like that, when I turn off the show an exploded or model break state, or maybe I brought it in this collapse state and I want to explode it, then we can build that out just by copying it. All right, so we go into the auto balloon, and for the longest time I was not a fan of the auto balloon, but it's gotten enough better, and it still does some strange things like crossing the parts and on the selections, but we can pick. So ignoring the multiple instances, it's only going to find one of each of the pins. And do we want it to go to faces, which would be a little dot, or the edges, which is the arrow? And then what kind of balloon settings you can go through and tinker with those and see what you get generated. All right, so when I highlight, I'm going to see the magnetic line, and as I drag that around, they're all going to move as a group. If I drag the end and compress it a little bit, it gets a little tighter. Decide that 6 really needs to be over here on its own. And as long as I'm grabbing those edges, and let's do the same thing to 4. Actually, 4 could go up here. Let me make a little more room. And I can bring 4 over to the other instance. And I'm either looking for that edge, or I don't think the silhouette edge is probably as good as selection. So we'll bring 1 out. Maybe 2 comes up here. So I can rearrange these and modify as needed, clean it up a little bit so that we get a desired result. All right, so 6 kind of got over here by itself, which is fine. All right, so these balloons are going to reference the bill of materials. I got a little video. So I want to rebuild. Well, we'll see where those are picking up after moving the view. All right, we'll go into a right click and into tables, which is the same as the annotations command manager tab to tables and bill of materials, or like we start off to tables, bill of materials. And we can customize these, which of course we will at some point, but I want top level display configurations of the same part as separate items. And then missing, I mean, there's, again, all of the parameters for the bill of materials. We place those. Right now, I don't really have anything attached to the description. So if I delete that column, that'll shrink it down a little bit. And now we have item 1. We go over, and item 1 is the base. Item 2 is the pin long. And then the crank, the short pin, the coupler. We go through all of that geometry. So, not quite sure what I need to do. I've seen those ghost images before, so maybe if we switch out, again, I'm not a real fan of shaded with ink being $1,000 a gallon. Make sure that you really want to see that. If it's just a PDF and you're not expecting anybody to print, then go ahead and do the shaded. But for our purposes, the wireframe or the hidden lines shown are going to be fine. All right, so when we save this, we're going to end up with a drawing file. And there's the previous for revision 3. And if I'm doing single sheets, then I'm done with this drawing. When we make a drawing package, we would go ahead and add the rest of the parts. So I'm going to continue in the next video with adding those parts and starting our drawing.